sex slaves, the rising sun, the best place in the world I've ever traveled to, and the tallest waterfall. All this and more. The QiRanger podcast starts now. Greetings and salutations, my most excellent friends. I hope that you're having a fantastic day. My name is Steve Miller, the internet's QiRanger, and this is the QiRanger podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here on YouTube, on QiRanger.com, or downloading the MP3 from your favorite RSS audio source. I really do thank you for taking the time to watch or listen to this week's show. Now, before we get into the thick of the matter, I just want to say, again, thank you so much, but also there are a few changes coming up on QiRanger.com that I want to make you aware of. Now, as you know, I love talking about the news. I love examining different aspects of what's going on, not only here in East Asia, but in technology, in business, and really around the world. And I've really come to rely on a number of different services to share that information, especially on Twitter and Facebook. However, one of the things that is just so frustrating about sharing the information on Twitter, or in some cases in Facebook, is that you're just so limited in what you can effectively share in a tweet. 140 characters, that's it. And in a Facebook post, you have a little bit more leeway in terms of writing and expressing at least my own ideas. So what I will be doing from here on out is I will continue to share these stories, but in a lot of different ways. I will also be incorporating them into certain blog posts on QiRanger.com to offer up a little snippet of the actual story and a little bit more in detail of my thoughts on it, and then tweeting those links out. So you'll have the opportunity to read the story, read the snippet. By visiting QiRanger.com, you can at least get the gist of what's going on, and then of course, go to the article and read it in full. Hopefully that will provide a really nice service for you, and that you'll be able to share your thoughts in comment sections over on QiRanger.com, since you can just leave a comment at the bottom of the blog post and share your ideas there, or continue to respond to me on Twitter or Facebook. I hope that will work and really start some interesting discussions between everyone, because that's why I like sharing these things. So if you haven't already subscribed to QiRanger.com, you can do so with any RSS feeder, or over on the right-hand side of QiRanger.com towards the bottom of the sidebar, there's actually a way that you can input any email address you'd like, and you can subscribe to the website, and every single blog post as it's released gets sent directly to your inbox. So that way you don't have to go anywhere, it just shows up, bam, there it is. So hopefully we'll have a lot of fun with that, and we'll have some great discussions. But without further ado, let's get things started with the news. Welcome back to the podcast. As we do every week, we start off the news with things that are happening here in the Koreas. Now, before I start in with the first story, I do want to say that at least on paper, there have been some really definitive results in the discussions with Kaesong regarding reopening the plant between North and South Korea. But as this podcast drops on Sunday, coming up this week, we actually have another set of drills between the United States and South Korea. And over the years, North Korea has always said that they view these drills as a prelude to war. So if North Korea follows through to their normal procedure, they will release a statement asking South Korea and the United States not to participate in these drills. And, quite frankly, I'm surprised we haven't heard that yet during the negotiation phase of this. But I also wonder if they will come back and say, okay, you're doing the drills, Kaesong's off the table again. So you have the result, you've come together, you say you're going to open it, and then all of a sudden, no more. No more Kaesong. So we'll see what happens. But the first big story I want to talk about this week relates to the economy here in South Korea. Now, South Korea is facing a huge cash problem, a huge debt crisis. Household debt is set to reach a record level here in Korea. Total debt will cross the 900 billion, that's a B, billion US dollar mark. And that is up $40 billion just from the first quarter of this year. And that is astonishing. Now, over the year, I have mentioned several times on previous podcasts about the financial crisis here in Korea. There was one study a year and a half ago that said a lot of people are spending roughly 150% of their income because of the exorbitant price of places to live in Seoul, especially in the Gangnam area. But I think a lot of it has to do with the focus on education. A lot of time parents will try to move their families to a better school area so that they don't have to travel as far for the after-school hagwons. And that's what really is sapping up a lot of money. Now, there's also a lot of people using disposable, quote-unquote, disposable income to pay for plastic surgery, and there's always people trying to keep up with the Joneses, quote unquote, to try and get the latest and greatest technology. So a lot of people spend far more than what they actually should be spending because Korea has moved away from a cash society pretty much to a credit society where everything is paid for by car. And I remember way back in college, that was one of the concerns that my mother had, is that if I really started using a credit card, I wouldn't be as hands-on with my money as I should be. And I think that's a legitimate concern. I think that if you continually pay by your card, then you don't have an idea of how much money you're actually spending. When I first came to Korea, I purposely did not use my bank debit card when I was paying for things because I wanted to really minimize how much money I was spending so I could save a lot and pay off any debt I had. So what I would do at the beginning of the month is I would set aside a figure, and this was 400,000 won, and that's what I had to use for the entire month. And that was for grocery, and that was for my entertainment and whatever else I wanted to do. My utility and that kind of stuff was outside that 400,000 won, but that was my core money. And I was able to save roughly about $1,200 a month by doing that. And I really think that if a lot of people would stop using the credit card, they would be able to do that. But unless spending habits don't change soon, especially when it comes to hagwons and the way that the rent structure is here, Korea, the economy is going to collapse in on itself because people are just not going to be able to make payments anymore, and what has been spent is going to further eclipse what has been earned. North Korea is expanding its uranium plant. Satellite photos show construction to expand the size of the enrichment facility to roughly double its size has been underway. The facility would enable the country to enrich radioactive material for both power and weapons use, and many suspect the goal of this expansion is mainly for power development. And the reason why they're saying that is because there really hasn't been a lot of bolstering, a lot of discussion on nuclear weapons or its missile program really since the April fiasco. So whether or not North Korea is currently preparing for a test is unknown. Now, I do think that North Korea is furthering their weapons development strategies, but they're really strapped for power as well. And I've always said that I don't think that there should be a limitation on who can and who can't have nuclear technology, just because it really sets up an us versus them society. I mean, of course, you don't want rogue states developing weapons, but so many countries have access to it, either directly on their soil or through alliances with countries like the United States, that it really becomes an issue of who has the better deterrent? If we look back to the events earlier this year, just the notion that North Korea had a nuclear weapon showed what a powerful deterrent that could be. I really think that global denuclearization would be a good thing. I think having that kind of technology is not wise, but I really also think that developing it for peaceful purposes, for power, would be okay. However, once you do that, you run into a whole mess of other problems. Look at Japan with the TEPCO plant, the Fukushima plant. Because of the tsunami, you have all this radioactive spillage, and that's the problem with a fission plant. You have the technology to make power, but you also produce an enormous amount of waste. And if you continue to produce that waste, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to put it up on the moon like in Space 1999 and make that the dumping ground? Are you going to send it to Yucca Mountain like in the United States and have that be the country's dumping ground? Because all that does is shift where the waste is from one location to another location and doesn't solve the fundamental problem of what to do with the waste. That's why when I was reading some of the news articles earlier this week and scientists were making progress on fusion power, the same kind of reaction that powers the sun, I was stoked because that is a clean source of energy. A lot of bang, hardly any waste. And that's the way to do it. So whether or not the end result of North Korea's expansion comes through and actually does anything of note is still up in the air. So we'll see what happens with that. Here in Korea, we have started using wireless electric vehicles, and this, I think, is pretty cool. Now, they're called online electric vehicles, or OLEVs, and they were developed by the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, or KAIST, which is one of the premier universities here in Korea. The vehicles are charged on the fly without a physical connection. Power lines run under the bus routes and supply the power to vehicles. 2 OLEV buses will be operating in Gumi, and the bus routes are about 15 miles in length, and if this pilot program is successful, it could revolutionize transportation. And I have to agree with that. One of the biggest problems right now with electric vehicles is that the distance you can travel on a single charge is just so short. And if you look at a city, say like San Francisco, which I love traveling to, their buses are all electric and they use the overhead wires. So if you can install a network grid where you have over-the-air power charging underneath the road, so as the car drives, it absorbs the power, and that is what provides the propulsion, you could really cut down on emissions. You wouldn't have to charge anything. The power would be instantaneously transferred to the vehicle, and then you could charge it at home overnight or whatever, so that you have a base charge and then just top it off as you drive. You could ideally, install this on the major motorways so that as you just commute on the highway, on the byways throughout the cities, you wouldn't have to use fuel. It's a great, great idea. It would just be so expensive to implement, but it is a step in the right direction. Naver, Korea's largest search portal, is now going after Kakao. Now, it is official. Naver is splitting into 2 companies. Naver, the leading search engine, will diversify into a search product called Naver and a gaming center called NHN Entertainment. Now, this marks the end of a brilliant partnership that began in 2000 when basically these 2 companies merged together. Naver is also the company that has developed the Line Messenger application. And while it is not popular in Korea, it is the #1 messenger in Japan. Now, this is seen as a very big move here in the smartphone penetration market because almost everyone here in Korea has a smartphone, and they estimate that over 70% of individuals have smartphones. So by diversifying their content, it's thought that they can better position themselves. Because right now Kakao is just dominating the entertainment, and that's where they're making a lot of money. Last week on the podcast I said they made $100 billion in just a single year, which is intense, and Naver wants a piece of that pie. It's said that by diversifying the two companies, by splitting apart, it allows Naver to focus on the search portal side of the business, and the entertainment will better be able to develop line and other gaming strategies. And I think that is pretty good, but if we look at, say, some US companies that came together in the past because it was thought to be the perfect marriage, say like AOL Time Warner, after a while they split apart because they recognized that you need to have dedicated focus to each of the industries. Seoul is set to deny the elderly their jobs. Now, this is a very interesting story and one that could impact a lot of people. One of my pet peeves in Seoul is the absence of trash bins. So people typically just throw stuff around. Now, what makes the city as clean as it is that typically there are some people of advanced age, some elderly people that go around and collect the trash, the rubbish, the cardboard, the cans, the plastic bottles that people just leave behind. And what they do is then they take that and they recycle it, and that's their income. However, Seoul is instituting a new law that requires scrap yards to be essentially businesses. Now, the city says that their scrap yards run by individuals are a blight, and that from now on, all recycling must be done by proper centers. Now, there are roughly 2 million people collecting scraps on the street, and just over 70,000 recycling centers in operation today. Now, if found in violation of the Waste Control Act, an individual could face 2 years in prison and 10 million won in fines. And that is huge because most of these people only make $100 to $200 per month. So it may be their primary source of income, but it certainly does not produce a high value. It doesn't produce a lot of money. But I will tell you, walking down the street and I see people cleaning up the remnants of boxes and other crap that is just laying around, I really do appreciate that service. And taking those jobs away, I think is just wrong. I think it's just wrong. And I personally do not see anything wrong with an individual being entrepreneurial and taking the initiative to go out and finding crap on the street and then recycling it. I think this is just a move by the city to try and drive more people to the recycling centers, and that those business owners are driving this to try and get the law passed so they can get more money. Also recently, the Gwangju's mayor office has been raided. Now, back in July, around the 20th, I spoke about how the city of Gwangju is in a lot of hot water for forging ministry officials' signatures on their financial agreement or financial assurance bid to FINA for the 2019 World Championships. Now, the city has said it hasn't really done anything wrong. It was just some little slight oversight in the whole matter, and that it wasn't any kind of intentional fraud. The government looks at it a little bit differently, and they've conducted some initial interviews, but they're really trying to pin the blame on an individual or a group of people who really sought out to misrepresent what the government was willing to pay for this event in supporting Gwangju. Stating here in the article, "We've questioned Mayor King and other officials, but it was not sufficient. That's why we conducted raids on the offices related to the official," one of the prosecutors said. "We are going to determine who is to be prosecuted after a thorough investigation." Now, I have said from the get-go, I think that's the right move to make. When you essentially, if you don't know what's going on in this story, Gwangju is trying to get they've been awarded the 2019 FINA World Championship, which is the Aquatics Championship. And During the bid process, they asked money from the government to support this endeavor, to carry some of the costs. It looks like the government was willing to put in essentially $5 million. However, the initial bid that was going to be submitted to FINA said that the government was going to put in $100 million. And on that assurance were signatures from a former prime minister and former minister of the MCST, the Ministry of Sports, Culture, and Tourism. And that's what is causing the problem, is that the government didn't okay that amount, they okayed the lesser amount. And then once the quote-unquote oversight was spotted, Gwangju made some changes and sent in the final documents. Now, FINA has come back and said that they're looking into it as well because it casts suspicion on what is really happening and whether or not Gwangju can actually financially pay for the event in 2019. Stories of sexual enslavement have been coming out this week because of what's been going on related to the courts, as well as this past week we had August 15th, which marked the end of World War II, Korea's Liberation Day. Now, Korea University released pages of a journal said to directly implicate the Japanese military in operations of Korean brothels during World War II. This comes as the Japanese government continues to deny they actively engaged in sexual enslavement. Quote, "The diary shows the case in which the Japanese military, with an absolute personnel management authority, issued direct orders and took control of issues regarding the comfort women, or sex slaves." And this is coming from Park Hang-yong, professor at the University Center. He said this in a press conference. "The diary is a historical record that shows the Japanese military, the Japanese government general of Korea, and its military command in Korea were involved in the forced mobilization of Korean women for sexual slavery." Now, this information is also expanded upon by Estelita D., who's 83 and in the Philippines, who recently went on record to share her story of captivity and sexual enslavement. Now, she was basically kidnapped by the Japanese when she was at a market to sell vegetables in her hometown in the Philippines, Negro Islands, in the autumn of 1944, and she was only 14. So once more, as the women who endured this indignity are getting older and having and unfortunately passing away. We actually had a recent woman pass away just a short time ago. We're seeing more and more cases come up about whether or not Japan will finally recognize in honesty what they did and whether or not there will be further reparations. I think this kind of document is fairly significant because it does show individuals in the Japan military chain of command actively running a brothel, which is something that they have categorically denied in the past. They said that, oh, they were prostitutes, they didn't recruit individuals. And this story and this document seem to paint a different light, and I think it is worth spreading the news about it and having people look further into the situation. Asiana Flight 214 is also back in the news because Asiana is willing to give every single passenger $10,000. Now, a lot can be made out of this and a lot can be just swept under the rug. Now, I will say that as a member of the Montreal Convention, which kind of sets the rule for all international flights and all airlines, that when there is an accident, when people are hurt or killed, the airline must make a payment to help offset the initial medical bills. It doesn't preclude anyone from suing the airlines, but they're supposed to put up this money up front so that if there's anything that needs to be paid out of pocket, that can be done. Now, what's interesting about this amount is that in some of the news reports, They said that the standard amount for a crash of this type should be about 12,000 US dollars. So they're a little bit short there, but I'm willing to give Asiana the benefit of the doubt that $10,000 is a fair amount for this type of thing. However, what also appears to be happening is that if you accept the money, you have to agree to a certain number of terms and conditions. Now, those terms and conditions don't preclude you from suing Asiana, but may make it virtually impossible to do so. And some advocates for victims' rights are concerned about whether or not that is the case in this situation. Asiana is not releasing the terms and conditions that the passengers have to sign to get the money because they're citing, well, if we do go to trial, and there's already one pending case based on last week's podcast, it may come back to hurt us. So personally, I think what should have been done is that Asiana just said, we're going to take care of everything. From the get-go, if you're on the plane, you send us the bill, we'll cover it. That's it. And then you can look at other kinds of damages through the court system and whatnot. I think that's the way that pretty much any accident should come about. It shouldn't be, oh, we have to give you some money to offset the cost. It's like, you just send us the bill and then we're done. And finally, from the Koreas, GM, General Motors, looks to be pulling out of Korea. Now, after Daewoo failed miserably in 2002, General Motors bought a significant stake in the company, and a few years ago actually rebranded all the Daewoo cars here as Chevrolet. Currently, 20% of all General Motors vehicles are made in Korea, with 80% of those vehicles being designated for export. And the company, General Motors, is stating that the reason that they're going to be pulling out of Korea is because of militant unionism, meaning it's just getting too expensive. The wages that people are asking for, just too expensive to keep up with. That's all the news from the Koreas. So now it's time to turn our attention to East Asia. And probably one of the biggest stories to come out in the past week relates to the end of the Second World War and the movement to reuse the rising sun flag in Japan. Now, a motion is now being moved through the Japanese parliament to adapt a more widespread use of the rising sun flag in Japan. A modified version is currently in use, but many around the world identify the flag with Japan, which is the motive for this legislation. However, some Asian countries equate the flag with the Nazi swastika, bringing questions if this is a further denial of Japan's imperial and militaristic past. And I think that's a legitimate question. Now, I will say this, that if you take a look at the United States, there is still widespread discussion and really harsh feelings towards many of the southern states for incorporating the stars and bars, which was the flag of the Confederacy during the Civil War because of its relationship and association with the Ku Klux Klan and slavery. So having the rising sun flag flown once more around the world and just walking down the street type of thing would equate many to associating it with a more militaristic, more imperial view of Japan. Now, I will also say that a flag is a flag and it's a symbol, and you have the power to give a symbol significance, and you also have the power to take away the significance. This past August 15th, Shinzo Abe elected not to go to the Yasukuni Shrine, citing that it might heighten tensions with China and South Korea. Now, because his party controls both houses of parliament, this could easily pass. This legislation could easily pass. But he needs to consider what impact that will have in the region. Japan is still currently in a sticky situation financially. If they adopt the rising sun flag, it could piss off China. It could really disrupt trade in the region. It could further anger South Korea. And again, not only would it sour trade relations, both of those countries could also look at decreasing their tourism to Japan even more. Right now, Japan is suffering major tourism deficits because people do not want to go to Japan because of nuclear scares. They're worried that they may be exposed to unsafe levels of radiation. By doing something that would anger the majority of the people just seems so unwise. And you can argue all you want that it's just a flag, that it's just a symbol, it's already in use as the naval flag. But when the two other powerhouses in East Asia raise so many objections over why it should not be used, just think of it from a business perspective. You have to wonder, is there something to it? Do you really want to damage your brand that much? People are trying to desperately get businesses to go back to Japan, to get more money flown, spent in Japan through tourism. Doing something like this may actually do more harm than good to the nation, and that's something that should be considered. In a study that should surprise no one, Japan and China think very poorly of one another. Now, a new joint survey by the China Daily and the Japanese NGO Genron NPO released data that 90% of the population thinks poorly of one another. And again, this goes back to the rising sun flag issue. If 90% of the general population of China thinks poorly of Japan, why would you do something that would increase that level of dissatisfaction? Also, in Japan, Shinzo Abe assures the nation that they will take action. Now, what he's talking about is taking decisive action to contain the more than 300 tons of radioactive water that's seeping into the sea every single day from the Fukushima nuclear power plant. It's unclear how long the water has been seeping into the sea, but many suspect it's been happening since day one back in 2011. And that is a very dangerous situation because it's just free-flowing into the sea. And in one report, we actually saw some increased radioactive levels of xenon being picked up here in the seas on the east coast of Korea. So if left unchecked, that could cause significant problems for everyone in the region. In another study, which I thought was fairly interesting in Japan, Japan's Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology conducted a survey on the use of corporal punishment. And they did this because a high school student, committed suicide last year after receiving a number of beatings. Now, what the survey found out, or the research study found out, is that in just 1 year, there was a 13-fold increase in the use of corporal punishment in Japanese schools. Now, here in Korea, the use of corporal punishment was widespread until a few years ago when it was just flat out banned. And unfortunately, it still does take place. But this kind of study is just blows my mind. In the actual suicide case, the kid was beat, I think, 30 or 40 times before he just decided he had lost all hope and committed suicide. To go from X to 13X in the span of 1 year really shows, in my opinion as an educator, that those in the classroom do not know how to effectively manage the students. There should be no instance in which you have to rely on corporal punishment to maintain order. You should not have to use corporal punishment as a means to get individuals to do the work, to behave, to become responsible students. That's the responsibility of the administration and the educator to find a system that works. And finally, from East Asia, the best camera is the one, in my opinion, that's in your pocket. Both Nikon and Canon are struggling with sales in South Korea because people are using their smartphones more. And I have to agree with that. The phone I use 9 times out of 10 to take pictures, if you follow me on Instagram, you know it's my iPhone. I use that more than any camera I've ever used in my entire life because it's always with me. There's no need, in my opinion, to spend a lot of money on a camera. It doesn't matter what make or model is. If you're only going to take a quick selfie, picture of your food, unless you're going to do a significant product with that picture, what you have here is fine. I think, what was it, the Nokia phone has 40-something megapixels. A lot of the Galaxy phones have 13 megapixels. The iPhone 5 has 8 megapixels. This one has 5. And for a small picture of me and my wife, that's perfect. You don't need anything more. You don't need to take a small camera. Now, we'll say that if I want to go out traveling and I want to take some snapshots of a palace or a temple or some great event, yeah, I want to have a camera for that. But I don't need to have a big camera with me all the time. And for most families, maybe you only have one camera. And if you don't use it all the time, there's no need to upgrade. There's no need to buy a new model time and time and time again. For my SLR, I use a Canon 20D. I bought that in 2005. It's 2013. And you know what? Aside from having to buy batteries, because the original batteries I bought in 2005 no longer hold a charge, the camera works just as well as it did back then, and it's only an 8 megapixel camera. But I get great pictures. And most of the time, I'm no longer even printing pictures, I'm putting them on the web. So I don't need 20, 30, 40 megapixels just to take a simple snapshot I'm going to put up on Facebook. And that's really what it comes down to, and Kodak learned this the hard way. What people really want is an easy way to take a picture and share it. And I think that's also why you see cameras like I believe the new 70D from Canon and of course the 60 from Canon have a Wi-Fi share functionality. Why the Samsung camera, the Galaxy camera I think it is called, may do pretty well because it's an Android phone and you can put an app on it, you take the picture, you're in Wi-Fi, you know, it's up on Facebook. That, I think, will be the future. And I think if Canon and Nikon can get behind that, they'll be able to sell a lot more cameras. But for me, I want to take a picture and share it. That's what I want to do. All right, really briefly here as we round out the news section. Stupid Americans. Now this story, I read this story and I was scratching my head and I was like, oh my gosh, please, please, please don't tell me it's the American. Yes it is. An American tourist in Florence, Italy snapped the finger off a 600-year-old statue of the Virgin Mary inside the Museo dell'Opera del Duomo. Really? Why were you touching it? Why were you touching this 600-year-old statue? Do you not know how fragile those things are? Come on now. Use your brain. Really. Don't be touching those. It's one of the things that I really struggle with because a lot of times you see these ancient artifacts and even though they say don't touch, people still reach out. When I was at Tonto National Monument, there were signs, don't touch the wall, da, da, da. And that's one of the reasons why I was stationed at the monument, is that I could watch people and remind them that their hand oils damage the rock faces and discolor what has been left. So I was really sad to see this. It was really sad, and unfortunately it was an American that did this, and I feel bad about that. Another story that I just really don't understand, and my friend Jay the Aimless Cook did a video recently on this, and that's the ramen burger. Now, if you don't know what this is, it's the latest craze. It's a hamburger, and what they do is they take ramen and they form it in the shape of a patty. They grill it up so it has a little sustenance, and you eat it. I just don't get that. That's not something that I would pay a lot of money for. I'm a sandwich guy, so I like buns. If I want a burger, I want some buns. Now, the Krispy Kreme burger, that may be something I could get behind because I like donuts as well. Even though I really love ramen, that as the bun, I just don't get. I mean, when I go out to Korean barbecue here, a lot of times I will make a pork patty or something, and I will use lettuce leaves as the bun. Again, I can get behind that. But ramen, no, I don't get that. And finally, this bit of news coming out of Thailand is very serious. They have a new law, the Thailand's Computer Crime Act, and it essentially gives the police power to arrest you if you are conducting what they say are activities against the state. And they've gone so far as to come out and say that if you like a status update on Facebook that they consider anti-state, by liking it, you give support to it, and then you are culpable, and you will go to jail. If you click on the show note links, you can read an interview with one of the police officers there that he just says, yes. And the reporter in the article was trying to get into the ethics and the rationale behind it. And I have to give the police officer credit for this because he did the right thing. And that's saying it's not a matter of whether or not it's right or wrong. That's the law, and I'm here to enforce the law. Now, personally, I think this destroys freedom of speech in Thailand. I think that this is going to kill journalism in Thailand. I think it is a very dangerous move, and the way it could potentially be implemented would eliminate the ability to express oneself. And also, again, how are you going to dictate what on the internet is anti-state? This whole thing just blows my mind, and I really hope that that provision of the law gets repealed. Well, my friends, ladies and gentlemen, that is the news this week. I'll be back in just a second. Yes, my friends, it is time for the question of the week, and this week's question comes in from Emil Minji, who is a follower of mine on Twitter. And Emil wrote in, "What was the best place I have ever been?" And I thought this was a really interesting question because it really made me have to sit down and think about things, because I have traveled quite a bit. I've been all over the United States. I've been all over the Caribbean, in Mexico. I've been to Indonesia, Philippines, here in Korea, Canada. I've been to a great many things. So trying to find like one place which is the best I have been to was quite difficult. Now, I will say that a lot of times when people ask me what's my favorite place in the world, I also struggle with that because I have a list of things that I really enjoy doing, and I try to come up with a place that fits all of those criteria. And they usually include things like I like the water, so I want a beach, but I also like hiking, so I want mountains. I do like all four seasons, but I'm at home most here in the summer climates, so I like things a little bit on the warm side. I'm not opposed to winter because things are incredibly beautiful when the temperature drops and you get the white stuff that comes. So looking back over my life and the places that I have felt most connected to, the places that if I had to go and said, Steve, we're going to fly you to one place and you have to live there for 10, 15, 20 years, whatever. You can have people come and visit you, and you can, of course, leave there. But you have to go back there, and you have to experience it, and on a routine basis, create some sort of content, some sort of report, and share about why you like that place. It starts to narrow down the list. It starts to narrow down the list to a particular place that I have been to many, many times, that I feel drawn to, that holds a special place in my heart, and that if given the opportunity right here and now, I would go there in a heartbeat. And for me, based on my travels, that would be Yosemite National Park. I love Yosemite. It is by far one of my favorites, if not the favorite national park that I have been to in probably the last 10, 15 years. And the reason why is that, granted, I typically go in the summer months, so it's nice, but it's at elevation. And there's a large array of activities: hiking, rafting, biking. You can maybe do a little diving in some of the lakes. I wouldn't really recommend it. There's wildlife there. The community of people who work there, I find just amazing. The bar staff at Curry Village has been there for so long. I was in Curry Village at the bar in 2006. And then Joe and I went there a few years ago, and the bar staff was the same. How cool is that? The bar staff was the same, and we were able to chat and talk about what's been going on the last few years. It's just a magical experience. And Yosemite for me is just a brilliant place. I find it so beautiful. Everything about it, I just love the park. And I think that out of all the places I've been, that's probably the best. It just holds something very special to me. And that is taking into consideration having been to Chichen Itza, one of, I guess one of the new 7 wonders, and being able to see the pyramid there, and being there earlier in my life to where you could actually climb up the pyramid. I don't think you can do that anymore. So I would choose this mountainous area, Northern California, that has just so much to offer in terms of activities, over being at just one of the most amazing archaeological sites I've ever been to, simply because of the lifestyle and what I associate with it. The same goes for something like Mesa Verde in the United States. I've been there. I've gone through. I would love to go back to Mesa Verde and spend so much more time learning about the ancestral Pueblo people and going through all of these dwellings. Mesa Verde is a beautiful place. I found being up there amongst the pines that they have there just fantastic. But if given the choice, I'd go back to Yosemite. There's just something about it that I just am drawn to. So that is my answer. Yosemite National Park. If you have a question, and it can be about travel, it can be about ESL, it can be anything in the world, I don't care. This portion of the podcast is for me to answer your questions. So if you have one, please send it to me at questions@QiRanger.com. In Encompassing 12,000 square miles, Canaima National Park is located in southeastern Venezuela. The park was established in 1962 and is the nation's second oldest, but also one of the best in the world. Join me as we trek around the globe. This is QiRanger RTW, Travel Talk Around the World.
Just take me away.
All right, my friends, welcome back to the podcast. And this is actually a very special section of the podcast for me. Now, earlier in 2013, I started another podcast that only went a couple of episodes, didn't last too long. I got busy with other projects, but I said I'd come back to it, and here we are. Now, that other podcast was called QiRanger RTW, the National Parks, and that's where I got the inspiration for the travel section of the current podcast. I wanted to keep that theme and also talk about the national parks around the world, not necessarily on the round the world itinerary that I had originally developed for the RTW podcast, but incorporate those sites and others as well as interviews to this podcast. And beginning this week, we will start with fresh new content about traveling not only in Korea, but around the world, and also talking to professionals in the travel industry about their experiences, their passions, and their goals to help better provide you with different travel ideas and different ways to enjoy traveling around the world. Now, in this week, we're talking about Canaima National Park in Venezuela. Now, you may be thinking, why Venezuela? Why this national park? Well, let me tell you something. Now, this park was established on June 12, 1962, and it is the second largest park in the country, and actually the sixth largest national park in the world, and it's roughly the size of Belgium or Maryland. So it's massive. It's pretty darn cool. Now, about 65% of the park is occupied by plateaus, and they're called tepuis. Now, these are a special kind of plateau that are millions of years old, and they have vertical walls with flat tops, mesas on the top. Now, these constitute a unique biological environment and are also of great geological interest. And it's the sheer cliffs that are particularly interesting because you have the opportunities to create some of the most spectacular waterfalls on the planet. Now, the word tepui means house of the gods in the local native language, which brings me to why we're talking about this national park. Why? Because it is the home to the world's largest uninterrupted waterfall. That's right, it's home to Angels Falls. Now, this waterfall has a height of 979 meters, which is about 3,200 feet, and plunges 807 meters. That is amazing. That is just mind-blowing to have a single waterfall 3,212 feet in height. That is something that you have to experience. That is something you have to see. Now, it's not always been known as Angel Falls. So, what is its name? How did it get its name? Well, the name Angel Falls has been its name since the early part of the 20th century and was named after a U.S. aviator, Jimmy Angel, flew over it for the very first time. Now, the common Spanish name is Salto Angel and was derived from Angel's surname. In 2009, President Hugo Chavez announced his intention to change the name back to what was purported to be the original indigenous name of Querepacupai Vena, meaning waterfall of the deepest place. And I have to agree that that is a pretty good move, because if you have an indigenous name, why not use it? Now, ultimately, Chavez did not move forward with that, and now there's some bilateral use of the names. Now, The actual falls was not known to the outside world until Angel flew over them in 1933 while he was searching for a viable ore bed. Now, he returned to the area in 1937 and tried to land his flamingo monoplane, the El Rio Caroni, atop the Tepuy, but the plane was damaged and his wheels sank into the marshy ground, and Angel and his 3 companions had to walk back to civilization along with his wife on foot. It took them 11 days to get back, and it wasn't until 1939. In 1939, that's when the map was published with the falls on it, but his plane stayed there for 33 years before it was retrieved and is now in a museum in Ciudad Bolivar. Now, the falls themselves require you to go up to them. The easiest way is by dugout canoe, and it takes about 5 hours from the city to do that. And you have a lot of ways to experience this, which I think is pretty cool. So you have a 1-day tour, 2-day tour, multiple day tours. Most of the guides only speak English and Spanish. Most of the guides only speak Spanish and a little bit of English, but you have an opportunity to go witness something so magnificent. You have a way to go to these falls. So you take this dugout canoe, you go all the way up there, and you're able to stand and bask in its glory. If you are a photographer, if you are someone who absolutely loves waterfalls, this is someplace that I think you need to go, because there's just nothing bigger, nothing grander, nothing more exciting to see. And with a national park so big, as I said, the size of Belgium, the size of Maryland, you also have the opportunity to do some fascinating hikes. And that's the other thing that is really the big draw to this national park, is that you have the opportunity to go up these tepuys, to see the fauna, to see the flora, just capture some amazing images, not only with your mental eye, but with your cameras. And if you're looking to go someplace and make a memory, to see something truly awe-inspiring, I can't think of another place better than this. I think that you would absolutely enjoy it. This is a place that I think is absolutely stunning. Well, my friends, that is all the information I have for you this week on QiRanger RTW. I'll be back in just a second. Well, my friends, we have come to the end of another podcast, and once more, I would like to thank you for joining me this week. I really do appreciate it. If you are not subscribed, I would appreciate you to subscribing to the podcast, either on QiRanger.com, iTunes, or here on YouTube. And if you know of someone who's interested in news or travel, please share it with them. I would really appreciate that. If you are an iTunes user, can you please log in, rate the podcast, and of course leave a comment. It's a way for the podcast to grow and eventually get featured. If you want to keep up with all my activities around the interwebs, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever you use in terms of social media, you'll find me there as QiRanger. But until next week, remember to be true to yourself and always be awesome.